two powerful sentences that speak to tonight's important event. It is encouraging to see that so many of you have gathered with us for more information on the subject of the heroin epidemic that is affecting our communities close to home and around this nation. Because our communities are changing, libraries are changing and transforming. People are looking for information 24/7 and a place to meet, study, and create. With National Library Week only a few weeks away, I invite you all to visit us across the street to see how we are transforming to meet the needs of our community. Where else can you watch a ventriloquist perform, celebrate Shakespeare's 400th anniversary, and even join in a family drum circle? If you don't have your new free Wagon Library card, you're missing out on our network of 20 libraries sharing more than 1 million free items and countless free programs like the one we have for you this evening. I would like to acknowledge the League of Women Voters of Washington County as our valuable partner in tonight's endeavor. Their president this evening, Judy Hughes, will be filling in as moderator for Jackie Campbell, and Jean Sperry from the League will be gathering your questions on note cards to be answered at the ends of tonight's program. We encourage you to ask questions, so please look for our student volunteers who passed out pencils and note cards as you entered, and if a question arises during the speaker's notes tonight, just raise your hand with the card and one of our two students will be around to retrieve them. We'll pass them along to Jean and then we'll filter them up at the end of the program so that we can answer as many of your questions as possible. In addition to the League of Women Voters from Washington County, I also wish to acknowledge our planning committee members, Tammy Taylor from the Washington Drug and Alcohol Commission and Stacy Ryback, Director of Community Outreach for the Office of Senator Guy Reschenthaler. We also truly appreciate the support of the Peters Township School District and the Peters Township Middle School staff who have graciously welcomed us once again to their stage for our second event in 2 months. Special thanks to Brian Griffin, who will be helping us with our audio this evening, and to the custodial staff for their assistance. A program like the one we have planned for you this evening does not come together without the help of our library staff, who have been involved on so many levels, from registrations to publicity, and we thank Margaret Deitzer and her team of program volunteers who are all here this evening. Please don't forget to visit our information tables in the lobby as you leave this evening to learn even more. I also wish to acknowledge the community support here this evening, including our Peters Township School District administrators, school board members, our Chamber of Commerce president, district PTA members, parents, and most importantly, our students. As you can see, our community cares about tonight's topic. Next, I'd like to introduce tonight's speakers and their topics, ranging from intervention, prevention, and treatment, who I invite to stand when introduced. Peters Township Deputy Chief Doug Grimes will be speaking in place of Harry Frick, and he has prepared a presentation tonight on the topic of legal issues. Dr. Owen Traynor, board-certified emergency medicine physician and director of EMS and pre-hospital care at St. Clair Hospital, will address medical issues from an emergency room perspective. Holly Livingston will be speaking tonight in place of Dr. Neil Capretto. Holly is the Business Development Manager from Gateway Rehabilitation Center and will speak on treatment options, current and future. Cheryl Andrews, Executive Director of Washington Drug and Alcohol Commission, will speak on prevention, intervention, and treatment. And Philip Little, Education and Outreach Specialist from the Office of the Pennsylvania Attorney General, will further discuss prevention options. And Harlan Shober, Washington County Commissioner, will offer tonight's closing remarks. Our moderator, Judy Hughes, will take my place at the podium and will keep our program moving along so that there will definitely be time for your questions. So to begin tonight's program with an overview, I ask you to please welcome Washington County District Attorney Gene Vittone.
Thank you. Hello, folks. This is a great turnout. I really appreciate you coming tonight. I appreciate the League of Women Voters and the Peters Township Library for hosting this important event. I'm District Attorney Gene Vittone, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk about the opiate epidemic. And on the flyer for this, it says the heroin epidemic in our communities. That word epidemic is a powerful word, and that's not hyperbole, and that's not overstating what's going on in our nation right now. That's exactly what we have here. The Centers for Disease Control has termed this an epidemic. And the numbers that hopefully I'm going to relate to you will convince you that we have a serious problem here and that we need to really start looking at ways to solve this problem. And this is no secret. This has been going on for several years now. There's been an unprecedented escalation in the use of prescription opioid medications and heroin. In 2014, 1.9 million Americans had a prescription opiate addiction, and nearly 600,000 had an addiction to heroin. The national figures on overdose deaths are astounding. In 2014, there were more than 47,000 deaths involving prescription opiate medications and heroin. Prescription opioid deaths alone in 2014 were 20,000 people. This dramatic increase in deaths due to prescription medication you are going to see is closely intertwined with the heroin deaths that we see. In the United States right now, we average about 1 death per every 20 minutes. The epidemic doesn't discriminate. It affects a broad cross-section of our society, be it age, gender, race, ethnicity, or economic status. It cannot be overemphasized that where you live, be it rural, suburban, or urban, it has no effect on insulating you from the problems of this epidemic. And this is a public health and a public safety problem. We know that overdose deaths are increasing at dramatic rates throughout the country among men, women, and most age groups. Heroin-related deaths increased by 406% in 8 years, from 2006 to 2014. While campaigning last year, I had the opportunity to hear from people firsthand about the heartbreak and devastation that results from an addiction to heroin and prescription drugs. I talked to families of lost breadwinners. I talked to families of lost children. I've seen the crimes that are committed in order to support an addiction. I prosecuted individuals who were originally prescribed medications for pain relief, as I'm sure Dr. Traynor will talk a little bit about the linkage. And they ended up going to heroin and committing crimes. For my 18 years in the district attorney's office, I knew that this was a new phenomenon. It was rare to have a heroin case as recently as 10 years ago. Now it's rare not to have a case that involves heroin or opiate drugs. I think to fully understand, I'm going to try this. Oh my gosh. I didn't know that was behind me. No wonder all you folks are like, that was scary stuff. Anyway, I think to really understand what's going on, and we have a couple pharmacists in the room, and they could help me with it if they want to pitch in. These are medications that are legally prescribed medications: oxycodone, hydrocodone, and Opana. And if you look at the heroin molecule, you'll notice that there's a big similarity between all these drugs. This is what's causing the problem, is right now, morphine and opium have been used for the treatment of pain for a long time. These medications have proven extremely useful in relieving pain, particularly in life-ending illnesses. In the mid-1990s, there was a policy shift that occurred within the medical community and also with the federal regulatory agencies that pushed the medical community and encouraged them to use opiate-based medications in non-terminal pain settings, particularly for chronic pain. And healthcare providers were encouraged to view pain as a fifth vital sign and to seek as a therapeutic goal the immediate relief of pain. This shift resulted from a variety of factors. The chief one being that there was pharmaceutical companies promoting new pain medications that were coming out there, and providers frequently weren't provided with enough education about appropriate opioid prescribing. There was also a widespread public impression that was put out by pharmaceutical companies that these drugs did not carry the high risk of addiction that we now know they possess if patients aren't appropriately monitored. Probably no drug is more of an example of this than the drug OxyContin that hit the market in 1996. It was marketed originally as an extended release formulation. It was marketed also as being abuse resistant due to the extended release formulation. The abuse deterrent aspects of the drug were quickly defeated, and many patients developed an addiction to opioid medications. And at that time, we began to see extensive doctor shopping. We saw pill mills, and you may have seen this on the news. People were going as far as Florida to obtain pills. In Peters Township, we saw this right here in 2012 when a physician was arrested for overprescribing prescription medication. That Dr. Oliver Herndon was charged by federal authorities for dispensing these powerful opiate drugs, oxycodone and oxymorphine. And you would see in his lot, you would see cars from all over the area and from different states. Many pharmacies, and this is where pharmacies are to be commended, my understanding of that case was that the pharmacists were the first to recognize this and stop filling his prescriptions. And they notified the DEA, and that's what led to the investigation. During one visit to the doctor, an undercover detective was told by Herndon to get his prescription filled as far away from here as possible because he knew that he was being watched. Many of the pills that were being prescribed were sold on the streets, and when he was arrested, Mr. Hickton, the U.S. attorney, told me that the price of Opana on the street actually doubled that very day. He was successfully prosecuted in federal court for Drug Act violations. He was also prosecuted for Medicare fraud, and he's in jail now. When those addicted to the medications could no longer obtain opiate medication, they quickly learned to go to heroin. Now, why did they go to heroin? Well, it was plentiful, and the other thing is, and the heroin we have available to us right now is a lot different than what it was as recently as 20 years ago. The purity we're dealing with, it's about 4 times as powerful. It can be snorted. Previously, you needed to inject it to get the effects that you wanted. But the cost has also gone down. So there's a common public misperception that the prescription drugs are less dangerous when abused than the illegal drugs. So that was the factor that led to what we're running into. It was the medications going to the heroin. The other thing is there are a couple other factors I'd like to just bring to your attention really quickly. Then we can talk about Washington County. You know, our society's constantly bombarded with marketing. And I know if you watch TV late at night, you'll see prescription medication commercials. The pharmaceutical community is now going directly to consumers to get them to try to buy medications. There's also so many pills out there. It's unbelievable how many pills are in the United States at this time. I saw a figure from DEA that the number of Vicodin, 99% of the world's Vicodin is consumed in the United States of America. So there's some guy in Germany that's using a little bit of Vicodin, but the rest of it's here. And it's in homes, and kids have access to this, and we're going to talk a little bit about that later. There's also problems with third-party healthcare payment systems that encourage many pills where a few pills may be something that's necessary. So hopefully this gives you a little flavor of the public health, public safety crisis. We've had 3,200 cases last year in the criminal division of the Washington County Court of Common Pleas. That's 1,000 more than we used to have just 5 or 6 years ago. 90% of those cases are driven by drugs, and that's why I'm here and that's why I'm talking to you. But there's more to it than just the criminal cases. The human toll is just simply astounding. These are figures from Tim Worko has done a fantastic job as our coroner tracking data, and I'm going to use a lot of his data here. He actually has it back to 1992. I'm not real good at PowerPoint, so I didn't go that far back. But in 1992, we had 2 overdoses, and I was a paramedic for 20 years. And I can tell you from thousands of calls, both here in Peters Township and throughout Washington County, I never had a fatal accidental overdose. So when I took office in 2011 and I saw that number right there, 46, I'm like, what the heck's going on? This is crazy. This has pretty much stayed the same, the number of motor vehicle accidents that we've had. We've been about 24 a year. It's stayed the same. We've actually gone down lately, which is great. This is just astounding. I don't know if you can see the bottom. In 2015, we had 73 overdose deaths in Washington County. In 5 years, if you add them up, that's 249 people in Washington County that died due to overdoses and poisoning caused by opiate drugs and heroin. This isn't just a problem, though, for young people. And this is some more data. This is from Tim's data for the last 5 years. As you can see, 46%, or almost 47% of our people that are dying from this are over the age of 40. Whether they're doubling up on their medications, whether they've had back problems and they've switched to the heroin, whether they're using different medications, a lot of what you're going to see with Tim's data is, and this is all available on the county website, by the way, 46% of the cases were a combination of 2 or more drugs, and 57% were from prescription medications, primarily opiates. We're not talking about disposable human beings here. These are fathers, mothers, brothers, sisters, veterans, public servants, wage earners, healthcare providers, and friends. Many became available or addicted through legitimate means. And in talking with Cheryl, we were in a conference a couple weeks ago on our way to Harrisburg. She told me 75% of the people that are presenting for treatment at her agency, she does all the assessments, and she'll tell you a little bit more about what she does a little later on. But 75% of the people that are becoming addicted, they report that they're starting with legitimate medical prescriptions. So these aren't people that are just partying too much and getting sick and getting an addiction and then having problems. These are people that have legitimate medical needs and they're not being appropriately monitored. Many of them died because they don't know about the potentiating effects of opiate medications with other drugs like alcohol, and in particularly benzodiazepines, Valium and clonazepam. This combination is particularly deadly. If you look at Corner Worka's data, you're going to see that. What are we doing about it in Washington County? Well, we started our response in 2012. At that time, there wasn't much attention being given to this, and what we immediately identified as a problem was a prescription drug problem and the fact that we were having kids that were using pills because they thought the pills were safe. They're coming from a pharmacy. They thought this was something safe, and we were having some issues with that. So we immediately started working in the schools. But our approach since then, it's evolved, it's matured a little bit, and we're going to continue to evolve as we go forward. But what we've been doing is trying to not necessarily prosecute people that are addicts. We just don't have enough resources. I mean, even if we wanted to put them all in jail, there's not enough jail space. It's also counterproductive. It doesn't do you any good. They need to be into treatment. So what we learned quickly is we can't incarcerate our way out of this problem. Addicted criminals, yes, they need to be held accountable, and they need to make restitution and make arrangements to repay people that they victimized. But they also need an opportunity to get treatment and then enter recovery. Otherwise, we're just going to be right back where we started. And we saw that with a number of people that were on our criminal trial list that were coming back for 5, 6, 7 different cases. We've established diversion programs through the Court of Common Pleas to get nonviolent offenders into treatment at the earliest possible phase. What used to happen is you'd be sitting on a trial list for about 12 months, and then maybe when you got in front of the judge, you'd order drug and alcohol treatment. We've cut that down now. We're trying to front load the system to where people are being identified as addicts, getting into treatment, getting assessed, and we give them the opportunity to get better. If they do better, great. If they don't, then we have other things we can do. We've established mechanisms to closely monitor them through the Adult Probation Office. We're also looking to save lives through the widespread distribution of Narcan and the provision of medication disposal boxes. It's asymptomatic that nobody can get treatment and recover if they're dead. Prior to the passage of legislation in October of 2014, only paramedics could administer the opiate blocker, naloxone, or Narcan to people in the field. It's now possible for first responders, police, and fire to do this. When somebody overdoses, they go into respiratory rest and quit breathing. Too long of that, they're dead. Naloxone reverses the effects of the drugs and they're able to breathe. A misconception has been out there about naloxone that it enables people to use drugs. Well, to the extent it keeps them alive so that they could use again, I guess that's true. But on the other hand, no addict, if you talk to them, wants Narcan. I listened to a seminar today out at Seven Springs with a physician, and he told me that actually they're using that as kind of a twist to get people to do things that they need to do in the emergency room by telling them that they're going to get Narcan if they don't.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you.
Yes, your time is up, and we need to move on to our next speaker,
Okay.
and hopefully when we get chance for questions at the end of
Okay.
the presentation.
Thank you.
The next speaker is the Assistant Chief of Police of Peters Township, Mr. Douglas Grimes, and he's going to cover the legal aspects of the problem.
We'll get rid of that picture first off.
Oh, okay.
Lesson learned. Well, good evening, and it's awesome that you all came out to hear this tonight. It shows an extreme interest in a very difficult subject and a topic that is near and dear to all of our hearts that are involved in law enforcement, first responders, and the like in the medical field. As you can see, I'm not Chief Harry Frick. Chief Frick was unable to be here tonight. So I'm going to talk to you just briefly about the laws and what we deal with as we encounter these. And heroin laws in general revolve around what's called the schedule of drugs, or the classification of drugs. And that's used at a federal level and a state level as well. In Pennsylvania, heroin is classified as a Schedule I drug. And what that means is that it has a very high potential for misuse. And as a result of being a Schedule I drug, it carries a heavy penalty, the highest penalty that you can for drugs. Heroin laws in general revert back to narcotics being illegal both in the state and federal system. And that's significant because they can be prosecuted at either level. The significance of that comes down to the federal laws are much stronger, and the penalties carry much more significant weight than the state laws, unfortunately. Federal charges may apply in the crime when there are multiple states involved, when the federal department of, whether it's FBI or DEA or whoever is involved in the investigation of the case, and they're looking at it, they can bring the charges. We can also involve the U.S. Attorney in some of those charges. Many states now offer, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you view this, drug treatment programs. And the drug treatment programs are used to give first offenders the opportunity to be rehabilitated. And it only applies when they plead guilty in most cases. Simple possession of heroin. There are three ways that you can get arrested. Possession, the simple possession of less than 1 gram of heroin in Pennsylvania is a misdemeanor. And it carries with it a maximum penalty of 1 year in jail for the first offense. That first offense can be modified, but generally that's what you see. Subsequent offenses can result in prison terms of up to 3 years. Purchasing heroin is the second way that you can get arrested. The purchase of heroin is a separate crime, and it can be charged in addition to. To buy heroin in Pennsylvania, defendants generally are charged with just the simple possession and not the purchase. Possession of paraphernalia. And you say, what is paraphernalia? Well, in the case of heroin, paraphernalia can be something as simple as a spoon. But paraphernalia involves, it's a misdemeanor offense, and it can be brought as an additional charge against anybody, whether or not it contains residue. If we come into possession through an investigation of a needle of somebody who is using heroin, that needle, whether or not it has been used and contains residue in the needle itself or in the syringe, can bring a charge of possession of paraphernalia. Pennsylvania Drug Court is used for minor offenses, and Pennsylvania Drug Court program exists just typically for a very limited opportunity, a very limited window. Typically that drug court consists of the judge, the prosecutor, the Office of Probation and Parole, usually the defense counsel is involved with it, and there may be some others. The goal of these drug programs are to divert these users and to give them the opportunity to kind of turn their life around. Just recently had an opportunity to speak here at the school in a program that the school district has called Character Counts. And we got to talk to kids about that, and we had a recovering drug addict in here who talked to the kids. And it was interesting to see the interaction and hear the story from someone who's lived this life and experienced it and has kind of come back from the brink. He, in that particular case, was an individual who had been on death's door 2 different times. But to see him speak to the kids was nothing short of dramatic. Dealing in trafficking heroin in Pennsylvania, there are 3 different sections that are involved in the Pennsylvania Crimes Code. Anything between 2 grams, but not less than 10 grams, can be up to a 2-year prison sentence, a $5,000 fine, or a larger amount, if that's determined by the court to exhaust the assets from the legal activity. And that has to do with asset forfeitures. At least 10 grams, not less than 100 grams, is a 3-year prison sentence with a $15,000 fine. And again, that fine can be increased. And then finally, anything 100 grams or over will bring a 5-year prison sentence and a fine of $25,000. Again, the federal sentencing for these same offenses is much more significant. Dealing in trafficking in Pennsylvania, each of these sections that I talked about have a clause in them that raises the prison term and the fine if at the time of the arrest and sentencing the defendant has been convicted of another drug trafficking crime. So you begin to look at what's called a prior record score and the number of offenses that they're involved in. Mandatory sentencing. In Pennsylvania, there's no authority by any court to impose a lesser sentence. Those are things that judges don't typically like, mandatory sentences, right, DA? But they cannot impose a lesser sentence. They can bring a little harsher sentence, but not lesser. And then nothing in this section shall prevent the sentencing court from imposing a sentence greater. So they're allowed to impose a greater sentence. We're going to skip by this one. Now, one of the things that I've heard, and I'm relatively new to this area. I grew up around here, grew up in Jefferson, but I'm relatively new to this area. And spent 28 years with Pennsylvania State Police, and then in August started here in Peters after I retired from PSP. And one of the things that I heard about Peters, this community, before I came back was, this is a great area, and it really is. It's a fantastic area. You have tremendous opportunity here in your schools and your community and what you have in front of you. But just because it's a great area doesn't mean that we're excluded from this epidemic. This photograph here, and it's a little tough to see from where you sit, but those are opened packets of heroin from a Peters Township case. Now that's a lot of heroin sitting there. And that's a story that I constantly hear when I travel around. Well, do you think this stuff really happens in Peters? Yes, it absolutely does. It's here. And the fact that it's here, you need to have your eyes open. You need to have them open wide for anyone you love, anyone you know, anyone you care about, and look at what's going on in their lives. Look for changes in their behavior. Here's some paraphernalia. Look for changes in the way they conduct themselves, in their grades, in their work attendance, in whatever, in their demeanor. These are the beginning signs. This drug will change a person beyond anything you could have ever imagined. The people who use this drug will steal from their grandmother. They'll steal the ring that grandma got married with, if that's what it takes to get that next high. I think some of the other people here will talk a little bit more about some of that maybe. But thank you very much for your time.
The next speaker is Dr. Owen Traynor. He's board-certified emergency medicine physician and director of EMS and pre-hospital care at St. Clair Hospital. And so he's going to have 15 minutes to clue you into how he's affected by it.
Well, thank you all for coming tonight. It gets to be kind of discouraging when you feel powerless to fix a bad problem. I can't start off without talking about some statistical things, and I don't think it's important for you to know these numbers, but I think it's important to look at how quickly change has occurred, how steep the curves of death are in the last few years. I think it's also important to look, as the number of addicts increase, that the death rate is increasing quicker, higher. And no matter what groups you look at, just about all the demographic groups have increased the amount of addiction and death. Here's a connection between other substances and heroin. The average heroin user is using 3 drugs. If you're an alcoholic patient, you're 2 times more likely to be using heroin. If you abuse marijuana, 3 times more likely. If it's cocaine, it's 15, and if it's opioid prescription drugs, 40 times more likely to be addicted to heroin. So it cuts a swath across all of the substance abuse problems we face in this country. But it's about human lives more than those numbers. Doesn't look like this person is very happy, or this life. The places that you wind up are not places where we would vote to visit. The things that happen to us that we lie on the floor someplace, maybe not breathing. And when this sort of thing happens, this is when you wind up in the medical system. We believe that this is going to take a lot of cooperation, preventing people from starting to use heroin. I'm not going to talk about that today in emergency medicine. And we believe that we need to treat the people who are addicted, and that's not what I'm going to be speaking about. But I'm going to be speaking about reversing the heroin overdose for the next couple of minutes. So here's something that happened on the news recently. I wish they could turn the sound up. Well, no, I don't have the speaker here playing that. Can you turn the sound up? And we must keep in focus. It's very important. This was from a news broadcast in the East.
A video released by Upper Darby Police in Pennsylvania this week is going viral. And a warning here, it's hard to watch. The video shows 25-year-old Michael Meany shooting heroin into his arm while riding on a crowded bus at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Meany starts to nod off, falls out of his seat, the result of an overdose. Officers arrived at the scene. They used Narcan spray. It's a heroin antidote to save Meany's life. He was escorted out of the bus and taken to a hospital before being charged with drug possession.
Okay, so that's in a bus during a daytime in front of everybody. This was edited so you didn't actually see him shooting up. If you go on YouTube, you can see the whole act. We're in a school, so I have to have a quiz. So let's see what we know about this stuff. All the following are signs or symptoms of a heroin overdose except. Choice A would be constricted pupils, smaller pupils. B would be slow respirations. C would be increased alertness Or D, all the above are signs of a heroin overdose. How many vote for A as the exception? How many vote for B? How many vote C? Okay, we have a bunch of C's. How many D? And how many are just merely voting present like our senators? Okay. Well, the correct answer, of course, is increased alertness doesn't happen with opiates. It's decreased alertness. So right now on this slide, we see some of the signs that we could all use to recognize when someone has too many opiates. They will be not alert. Their pupils will be small. Their respirations will be slow. Next question. All of the following may legally administer naloxone or Narcan to a person with a suspected heroin overdose except. So if A is firefighters, B are paramedics, C are lay people, or D says all the above can use naloxone. How many think A is the answer? How many B's? C's? D's? Well, it turns out all can use it. Because of that legislation that you spoke about earlier, it allows lay people to administer naloxone to people who need it. So if you have a family member or a friend who are on opioids, or if you know somebody who's using heroin, you can get a prescription from your doctor and some training, and you can save a life. So all of us can help. So how does it work? Let's travel back to the days of science we took in middle school. Well, it turns out that opioids, as you showed, have similar structures to naturally occurring chemicals in the body called endorphins that hit a receptor on a cell. So this opioid can attach to that receptor much in the way that a lock can fit into a key, and it can start a reaction in that cell that results in a response of the body. So there's the opioid. It's hitting an opioid receptor, and they fit on there, and then it causes reduction of pain. It can cause decreased mental status or alertness, constricted pupils, slow respirations, depression of the central nervous system. So that's how that works. What about naloxone? Well, it turns out that naloxone has a shape that can fit in those receptors also. And it will bind to that receptor more avidly, more strongly than the heroin will. And so it displaces the heroin from that receptor and occupies it, thus blocking that action on the body. And it turns out that because of that, the opioid, the heroin, the other opiates that might be in there are now no longer on the receptors. The patient will breathe, and if enough is given, will wake up. So that's how it can work. In our work at St. Clair Hospital, we partner with the EMS agencies, and these EMS agencies have gone into their communities and partnered with firefighters and with police officers to give naloxone to opiate-abused patients or overdose patients. We've elected not to use an injection and have a needle because many of these patients share needles, might have hepatitis C or HIV infections. So rather than risk exposure to blood products, we use an intranasal route in which the medication would be sprayed into the nose. So here's another video. Let's see if it plays.
The LMA Mad Nasal is the safe and painless way to deliver medications directly into your patient's bloodstream without an intravenous line. To use the Mad Nasal, fill the syringe with the proper volume of medication and connect the atomizer. Place the Mad Nasal gently but firmly against the nasal opening and briskly compress the syringe plunger. The medication exits the tip of the Mad Nasal as a fine atomized mist, resulting in broad coverage of the nasal mucosa with a thin layer of drug. The medication rapidly absorbs across the mucous membrane into the bloodstream, as well as directly into the cerebral spinal fluid of the brain, avoiding first-pass metabolism. This achieves medication levels comparable to injections. Once in the bloodstream, the medication circulates throughout the body. In the central nervous system, it enters the brain and binds to neuroreceptors, exerting the desired clinical effect and leading to resolution and improvement in the patient's symptoms.
Is that a way you think you could administer this medication, right? So in order to use it, we would have to suspect that somebody has an opioid overdose, whether it's heroin or any other opioid. How might we suspect that? not awake, not alert, not breathing very much, small pupils, not responsive. Could you recognize that in someone? Some of you are like that now from the boring talk. If they're having a lecture, that's probably not an opioid overdose. So if you recognize that, and we know that first these people die because they stop breathing, our goal merely is to improve breathing. And so if you injected that naloxone into the nose, in a short period of time that patient would be breathing faster, might even wake up. So that's the important thing. The pack that we've made at our hospital and distributed looks something like this. The naloxone is in a pre-filled syringe that you would assemble and put that MAD atomizer device on it, and then half of it would be squirted in each nostril. It doesn't come with the lipstick, though. That's an accessory you'll have to buy yourself. So 1 ml into each nostril. So that's half, as it turns out. If you put a little bit more or a little less, it won't matter. The matter is getting it all in. And then, if the patient wakes up, we still would like to see them and observe them at the hospital. There's a theoretical concern that the half-life of the heroin will last longer than the half-life of the antidote. So if that's true, it's possible that we could wake somebody up, and once the Narcan or naloxone wears off, they would be overdosed again. So we always want to see those patients, particularly if they have long-acting opiates. You may have heard about fentanyl patches that somebody would wear to get pain medicine for 3 days. If somebody eats one of those or ingests them, then we need to watch them for at least 24 hours. So we would like to see all of these people, and we'd like to have the opportunity to talk with them and maybe try to get them into the next phase, and the phase of meeting with the rehab people and getting off the medications, getting off the drugs. I have 3 minutes and 25 seconds left. Do you have any questions or comments?
We're going to have a special question portion of the evening. So
Since I still have a little bit of time, recently there's an article published in the Annals of Emergency Medicine about emergency medicine responding to this. And one of the fears we have is that sometimes the pendulum swings too far one way. Hey, you're not taking care of pain well enough. And now it's gone back to the other way. Now you're giving too much pain medicine. We would hate to see people who really need that medicine deprived of it. And there's an article that's going to be published shortly that they interviewed 59 heroin addicts who were in an emergency department. And they asked them, how many of you received your first dose of opiates in an emergency department? And it was 17% of them. And then if you start doing some math, like saying, well, 17%, these people have been addicts for about 15 years, so that's 1% a year, and there are 289,000 heroin users in the last month that we have data on, so that means the 3,179 heroin users created each year by their first exposure in the emergency department. And then if you say there's 135 million emergency department visits in a year, from the last year we know the numbers, and 61% of those people had pain, 51% of those people received some pain medicine, and you drag it out all the way down to it takes, according to this study, 7,864 people to get an opioid pain medicine in the emergency department to make one heroin addict. I don't know if those are the true numbers. That's one little study with 59 people, but it says there's some connection. In where I work, periodically I get a letter from a prescription drug benefit plan that said, your doctor number 8, you wrote for 12 Vicodin tablets for somebody, and there's a list of 12 doctors, and somebody wrote for 90 of them, somebody wrote for 120 of them, and they're telling me 4 months after I wrote that prescription on a patient I may never see again. Well, one of the components we need to do to make a plan that really works is to look for the high-risk people and not write prescriptions for them. Look for the people who are diverting the prescriptions and giving them to other people, selling to other people. We need to do that. One of the ways would be to have a central database that before I write the prescription, I put in that patient's name and I see in the last 2 months they had 600 tablets of Percocet or Vicodin, and they went to 17 different pharmacies in 5 different states. Do I write that prescription? No. The CDC has a new thing, a new guidelines that just was published in the last week that says If you write a prescription, write for the lowest possible strength for the shortest amount of time, not more than 7 days, and 3 days is often enough. But after that, the family doctor, the doctor who's going to prescribe after that, they need to have a talk with you about what's reasonable. And we need to study means of taking care of pain that are non-pharmacologic and find what works, because we are part of the problem. So I thank you all for coming tonight, because it makes me far less discouraged to see that I can't do it, but we can. So thanks once again.
I just want to take a few seconds to remind you, if you want to have a question answered, there was students handing out index cards as you came into the auditorium. Please write your questions and hold them up, and those students will collect them and bring them down here to the stage area. The next speaker is Holly Livingston. She's the Business Development Manager for Gateway Rehab Center. Okay, Holly, you have 50 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for coming out. I was sharing with some of my colleagues that panel that we did last week, there were 7 individuals in attendance, so this is by far our preference. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy evenings. Yeah, definitely. Give us all a hand. Yeah. As was stated, my name is Holly Livingston. My background prior to coming into the business side of Gateway Rehab was in clinical. I was an adolescent therapist for a number of years and spent the majority of my career on that side. And so my experience lends itself to every level of care that's out there, particularly for adolescents and young adults. And I want to share some of that information with you. As you're thinking of your questions this evening, please feel free to ask any and all questions. I know myself and our colleagues here will do our best to get an answer for you, and if we can't answer it for you tonight, we'll get some answers as well. So with that, our top 3 drugs of abuse for adolescents and young adults still remain tobacco, alcohol, and marijuana. Alcohol being the #1 drug of choice that is technically legal at the age of 21 for adolescents as well as young adults. Marijuana being the #1 illegal drug of choice for adolescents as well as young adults. What this slide illustrates is that our top 2 columns, you have marijuana in the first column, painkillers in the second, they are neck and neck. And so what we're seeing is a definite trend that you all are hearing about in various forms. To take that a step further, in Pennsylvania, we lead the country in the number of prescriptions sold, and we have risen from number 14 to number 7 in overdose-related deaths. And so oftentimes people will say, well, Holly, how did we get here? How in our state, in our communities, did we get to this point? It's marketing. It's business. The United States and New Zealand are the only 2 countries in the world that have direct-to-consumer marketing of pharmaceuticals. We encourage people to ask their doctor about fill in the blank. The #1 prescriber of prescriptions are primary care physicians with virtually no training in mental health or substance use disorders. The second highest prescribers are dentists. They're very regimented in their prescribing practices, and therefore our access has become infinite. The consequence that we face now is that we have a generation that is desensitized to the use of prescriptions. We have young people that have been inundated their entire lives with commercials where you can literally diagnose yourself. There's a pill for everything. Combine that with natural adolescent development, they're naturally impulsive. They have an inability to delay gratification and an inability to manage normal life stressors. Our young people assume that taking a prescription, as you heard, even if it's not their own, has to be safer than what they're going to get on the street. In my facility, how that has played out is a lot of data-driven decision-making. We've had to shift gears in the traditional methods that we use in our treatment approach. As we've seen a decrease in outpatient admissions, we've shifted that to an increase that's been offset by inpatient admissions. We have a young adult population where we used to treat a lot of 13 to 17-year-olds. We now have shifted that demographic to that young adult population, the 18 to 25s, the new workforce. that new generation of parents and community members. We also see an increase in our female population rivaling our males. And with that, our patients have said that opiates are oftentimes their primary drug of choice. And what that means is they have told us they've never tried a cigarette, they've never taken a drink of alcohol, they have never smoked marijuana. When they started is with a sports-related injury. They had their wisdom teeth taken out. They had a legitimate issue that got out of hand. Young people don't understand that painkillers are related to heroin, morphine, and fentanyl, particularly with signs and symptoms of overdose and withdrawal. They don't understand that your body develops a tolerance, needing more of the drug to get the same effect. And later in life, if you need surgery because of that tolerance, it may make you more difficult to be sedated or have pain medication for legitimate surgery because you've rewired your brain chemistry. Essentially what we're dealing with are underdeveloped brains and inexperienced users, because at the age of 18, technically our young people are considered adults. However, we know now that the body and the brain specifically doesn't completely form until the age of 21. As I mentioned, our outpatient evaluation and admission piece changed. At the time, back in 2010, we were evaluating approximately 500 young people and admitting approximately 450. Fast forward approximately 4 years later, we're evaluating 425 and admitting 375. Counter to that, our inpatient has increased by 100 students. We treat an average of 600 to 700 students per year. With our age distribution, again, over a 4-year span, we were seeing more of that 13 to 17-year-old, which has now shifted to the 18 to 25s. And again, that is a direct correlation with regard to that rivalry between marijuana versus our opiate use. Now in our rehab center, we start treating at age 13 and we go all the way through adult, and what this looks like is approximately 30% of our population is within that range, that teen, young adult range. But we've had to divide out our programs. So we still have our traditional teen program, but we've had to do some configuring with a young adult population, that 18 to 25, and then also segregated out that older adult, the 30-year-olds, the 40-year-olds, because the life experiences are much different. The patterns of use are very different. Just another illustration of how our female population is catching up with our males. And then as we start to look at specific diagnosis, again, this just reiterates the national trend. We are right in line with those statistics that I showed you at the beginning. Cannabis and opiates being primary diagnosis, with cannabis being specifically 30 to 53%, while opiates have comprised 32 to about 49%. This number of opiates has almost doubled in a 4-year time frame. And then at our outpatient level of care, we are still seeing the traditional cannabis as well as alcohol in terms of diagnosis. So our options, the two most immediate are in-school support and private practice. How many of you are familiar with your student assistance program in the district? Anybody? School folks don't count. Okay, administration, please look around and make sure that you are promoting this program, because it is literally the best kept secret of early intervention in Pennsylvania. Student assistance is comprised of a team of individuals in the district. It's a kindergarten through 12th grade model. It was established in 1984 by the Pennsylvania Department of Education, the Department of Drug and Alcohol Programs, and the Department of Human Services. Those entities oversee the model, which was adapted from employee assistance. What we knew back in 1984 is that there was a surge of opiate-related deaths, heroin specific at the time, in Western Pennsylvania, and a group of individuals got together and started to search for appropriate models that would be effective to intervene at the school level. And so they modeled student assistance after that employee assistance process. Our rehab center provides training and consultation for student assistance teams, including Peters Township, to identify those student barriers to learning and connect with services. The beauty of this model is that you have administrative support, you have faculty, student services would be your guidance, your social worker, your nurse, school resource officers, juvenile probation as needed, and then you have county mental health and drug and alcohol liaisons. We're also encouraging schools to train your coaches, because when you move from elementary to middle school, middle to high school, your coaches and your band directors see a large volume of students. They have a good rapport with parents and community, and they are also another set of eyes and ears that can help with that early identification. As a process of student assistance, there can be a screening assessment, and based on Pennsylvania data, 86% of students who have gone through student assistance and received an assessment also followed through with treatment recommendations. That's an awesome thing. That is a wonderful in-school resource that you as community members, as parents, as neighbors, as parishioners have at your disposal. The 14% in the corner that did not receive treatment, this data is pre-Medicaid expansion, and so there were still and still are some barriers to treatment. However, I think 86% is a pretty good outcome. And what that assessment can lead to, if it is determined that there is a drug and alcohol issue, are various treatment levels of care. In a detoxification level, that's a medically monitored process. For me, give me 36 to 48 hours, and I can physically get you clean. That's essentially the easy part as a treatment provider, because then, once you're clean, we need to get you out of your head. The thinking, the feeling, the emotions, we have to start to learn to live life on life's terms and identify those triggers, those stressors, whether it's family or school or friends or work environment, whatever those life stressors are, we have to start to begin to learn the tools in how to manage without the drink or the drug. Once you're medically stable from a detoxification, you're moving into an inpatient level of care. Depending on your circumstance, it may be a week, it could be 2 weeks, it could be a month, it varies. Once you're stable at that level, we're going to step you down to an outpatient level. This is essentially where the rubber meets the road. You are practicing the skills that you learned in inpatient in an outpatient community setting. The difficulty for teens that is different than adults is that kids can't change people, places, and things. They can't divorce their family. They can't change their school or move out of their community. So as treatment providers, we have to go through a different model in order to effectively impact that student and provide the support mechanisms around them to start to begin that life of recovery. And then with aftercare, essentially what we're looking for is, how is the student managing those stressors? What is going on at school, at home, with friends? How are things being received? Do we need to go back and relearn some different types of skills? And so those are things that are, again, taken into practice. As I mentioned, we enhanced a lot of our programming because we have seen that shift in demographic. And what that involves is, if someone needs a clinical evaluation, you can get it with my facility within 24 hours. We also added a case management component. We have a specific individual that answers the phone. She comes out, she travels, she will do that evaluation. She will walk that parent or family member through the entire process and get that individual to where they need to go. We have a 24/7, 365-day admission process as well. The accessibility we're trying to make as convenient as possible. We also understand that gender, those girls that are catching up with the boys, we need to do gender-specific programming to look at things like friendships, relationships, family, that are unique to male versus female. St. Clair Hospital, we have a great relationship with, and we will do a direct hospital transfer. So when we were talking about those patients that are coming into the ER and getting stable, that's a conversation that we have then to see, is there a bed available and how can we smoothly make that transition? Family education is a large component and always has been, but particularly with that 18 to 25-year-old range, those individuals tend to stay at home a little bit longer. They are not necessarily launching as we would like them to, and so we have to take the family through that process of support without enabling. it's not just about fixing the individual, the addicted individual. It's about helping the family to learn also how to manage that person without that drink or the drug in the system. And then we have and continue to enhance our evidence-based treatment practices. We start to look at things like trauma-informed care, abuse and neglect issues, post-traumatic stress issues, any number of things that can come into our doors. We want to be able to provide the best comprehensive care that we possibly can. That's it. You're up. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is, let me find, Cheryl Andrews. She's the Executive Director of Washington Drug and Alcohol Commission. Is that Washington County?
No.
Just Washington? I thought there was a error on my...
No, you're correct.
Okay, thank you.
I can begin. I'm ready.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I only have 7 minutes, so we're going to just fly right through this. And some of my slides have already been utilized, so hopefully I can get through things. I am Cheryl Andrews. I'm the Executive Director for Washington Drug and Alcohol Commission. We had a table set up out there. We were handing out information. Our website is here. I would encourage you to visit our website. We're a wealth of information. Basically, we are a nonprofit independent agency that holds the contract with the state of Pennsylvania. We are the single county authority in Washington County, and we provide prevention, intervention, treatment in the sense of case management and recovery support services. Our mission is to engage, educate, and empower individuals to live healthy, addiction-free lifestyles. Mr. Vittone graciously shared the similarities between prescription medication and heroin. One of the things that we really like to start promoting is the fact that we need to shift our conversation, and we need to start talking about addiction as a disease, as a chronic illness. And the question is, how do you catch this disease? Some people have a predisposition genetically, but because it involves basic brain functions, everyone will become an addict if sufficiently exposed to drugs or alcohol. So as was stated, especially from Mr. Vittone, that this knows no boundary. And we just heard that young people are becoming addicted because of sports injuries. So again, we need to be very mindful that the more we put in the more we're around it, the more likely we have an addiction issue. The doctor graciously talked about what to look for in people that are using opioids and signs of an overdose. One thing that I would like to add to that is the fact that many times you won't find somebody like this with track marks and a needle in their arm, but when you come upon someone, their skin will be blue or purple. The longer their breathing has been suppressed, they will literally have a blue color to them. So who are we? We're Washington Drug and Alcohol Commission, and basically, I mentioned these are our focuses and this is what we do. So in the prevention department, we have trained staff with years of experience, and we offer free prevention services to all 14 school districts in Washington County. We use evidence-based programming. We do pre and post tests. We have good results from those. And we do programming from pre-K all the way through older adults. We collaborate in Washington County with the county prescription drug summits, with the take-back days that we promote, and we are involved with positive messaging campaigns. Intervention. Currently, our greatest intervention is our naloxone training and distribution, and this is in collaboration with the district attorney. So far, we've trained over 500 individuals, and that includes 24 police department, I don't even know how many fire departments, first responders, community members. We're actually coming back to Peters Township to the library next week and doing a community Narcan training. This is one way that we are intervening with the overdose prevention, and it's been incredible the response that we've had in setting up the training and distribution of Narcan. Holly mentioned the student assistance program. We have representation on all the student assistance programs in the 14 districts. The purpose is early identification of substance use disorders or problems with substances, and we can make that referral to treatment in a very timely fashion. One other thing that we offer in Washington County, we contract with treatment providers to provide treatment right in the school district to eliminate the barriers of transportation or having to make appointments after school. We also provide intervention educational groups currently for adults, and we will soon be adding intervention groups for adolescents. Our case management unit, this is the big component of what we do and how we're addressing some of the overdose issues within the county. So we've screened 1,300 people since July 1. People have called or we've intercepted them. They have a problem, they want to go to treatment. Approximately 1,000 assessments of that 1,300 actually had assessments, and then fewer would be referred to treatment. The biggest thing about our case management unit is that we're targeting. So no longer do we have to wait for a phone call for people to say, I need help. We're intercepting them at the points when they may need it. So we have dedicated case managers assigned to the school district to do assessments when the SAP team identifies a student. We have dedicated case managers for our criminal justice system, which includes courts, probation, all the diversionary programs that we're putting into place. The idea is that we want to get people into treatment on the front end and not the back end of all the legal issues. We have field-based case managers for our Washington County hospitals and for children and youth services. This is huge. We are really paving the way at targeting where people need help, because people just aren't always raising their hand and volunteering and coming in for treatment. We provide recovery supports. They're certified recovery specialists. These are individuals who are in long-term recovery themselves. They have had issues with substance abuse. They work for our office and they support other people that are working a recovery program. Actually, a study was done over the last 3 years of implementing recovery supports, and it's proven to save a cost savings through all the systems of about $33,000 a month. So basically, this peer support helps to eliminate barriers. Okay, so if I could just finish real quick. We need to change the conversation from problem to solution, move to a public health model approach, reduce stigma, treatment rather than incarceration, and we need to continue to have legislative support. And finally, there is my last comment. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
We're coming down to the end. Now our last speaker is Philip Little. He's an education and outreach specialist from the Office of Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So we're very lucky that he'd made the trip here today or this evening.
Well, thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? All right. First and foremost, I want to thank the Peters Township Library and the Washington County Women League of Voters for hosting this event. I have the responsibility as being the education and outreach specialist at the Pennsylvania Office of the Attorney General doing education and outreach for over 10 counties of western Pennsylvania. It's an awful lot of driving and an awful lot of meeting a lot of people throughout my time. I come to an awful lot of these events as well, and this by far is the best attended event I have ever seen. Holly mentioned that, I think prior she went to one and there was about 4 people there. Unfortunately, that's the norm. I am so impressed with you guys as a community coming out here today. Give yourselves a round of applause. So, some of the things I want to talk about here, and what we're here talking about, is addiction and heroin and opioids. And make no mistake about it, ladies and gentlemen, this is an epidemic. As you heard Mr. Vittone talk and Ms. Andrews talk, that this knows no boundaries. I call it an equal opportunity destroyer. That it doesn't matter where you live, your age, your gender, your socioeconomic background. It will take everything from you. Through my travels of being an education and outreach specialist, I have had the privilege of meeting many people in recovery. And when you think about addiction, you typically think of people getting addicted that are at a young age, teens and early 20s. One story particularly sticks out in my mind of a gentleman who was 40 years old, had a great job, was a construction manager, never did any drugs in his life, was on the work site the one day and gets his leg crushed, needs knee surgery, and is prescribed prescription opioids. And right there started the downward spiral. And before you knew it, in 2 short years, he lost his job, his house, and his marriage because he became addicted to heroin. Unfortunately, that gentleman's story is not unique. Many of you in this room here today may have a personal story like that, and I as well, and our family and our friends and loved ones that we all know. So what I want to talk about today is, how do we prevent this from happening? Sorry, that picture was there behind me. I didn't mean to scare you there. I usually have this on up here right there. But how do we prevent this from happening? Because that's a big thing that we need to understand. So let's talk about a few things that we as a community can do to prevent the spread of heroin abuse and prescription opioids. The first thing I want to talk about here is what we of the Office of the Attorney General have done in prevention of prescription drugs. And as you can see behind me in this statistic, between February of 2014 and February of 2015, we at the Office of the Attorney General have destroyed 50,000 pounds of prescription drugs, or 25 tons. That's an awful lot of prescription drugs. And here's the thing that people don't understand when it comes to prescription drugs. These things kill more people than heroin and cocaine combined do in 1 year. They kill more people, 300% more people, than all gun-related deaths do per year. But any of you that are responsible gun owners out there know we keep our guns locked up and know where they're at all times. But yet these things right here behind me are unlocked in our medicine cabinets, sitting beside our nightstands and beside our kitchen sink, where children can get a hold of them. You at Peters Township have a great opportunity to destroy your prescription drugs by going to your local police department and putting them in a drug take-back box located in the lobby. That is one way that you can prevent those prescription drugs that we all have laying around from getting wisdom teeth taken out or previous surgeries that we all have in our house. Getting them and putting them in that drug take-back box is one step that we can do to prevent them from being in the hands of someone who can abuse them. So there's one step that we can do as a community here. The other thing I want to talk about is the deaths in the United States and how big of an issue this truly is. Well, just this past year, since the beginning of this year, and this statistic came out yesterday, I looked, almost 6,900 people have died from an overdose of drugs or heroin since the beginning of this year. To bring it a little closer to home, the DEA every year has comprehensive statistics that they bring out on the Commonwealth and about drug overdoses and deaths. Just last year, almost 2,500 people in our Commonwealth alone died of drug overdoses. So how do we stop that? Well, one of the ways that we can do that is by utilizing our anonymous tip line and telling us about any drug activity that is happening in your community. I encourage you, all of you, in the lobby, there's this piece of paper out here with a magnet that has all the information behind me. Please put this on your fridge. You can call us at the number behind me, and we do not care who you are. What we care about is getting those drugs off the street so someone can't use and we don't have another potential casualty. Also, for any of you that are savvy with technology and texting, you can text us your tips as well by texting your tip to PA Drugs at 847-411. Again, this is one other step that we can do to make sure that we have less casualties here in our community. Another big thing that I talk about, and this is the thing that I take the most pride in because I'm the education and outreach specialist here in Pennsylvania, or Western Pennsylvania, is that we have comprehensive programs that we go throughout school districts, Boys and Girl Scouts, church groups, you name it. If you think there is a need for us, my information is right there behind you. Contact me. This is a free program. It is your tax dollars at work. To give you an understanding of where we've been recently here in Washington County, we've been in the Canonsburg School District, Chartiers Houston, Trinity, and Washington. Any of you, if you find this beneficial and you have an audience that wants to listen, please contact us. We can't have enough education with our young ones about this so that they are more informed and they choose not to pick up and use. And then the last remarks I want to mention here is that we as law enforcement are not going to arrest our way out of this situation. We're just not. We need help. We need help from the community in letting us know what happens, but also we need to make this a multi-pronged approach where it's not just law enforcement. We need the help of our drug and alcohol, our county drug and alcohol, helping people, as well as we need education, because I can't say it enough everywhere I travel. Arresting someone and putting them in jail is not the answer. The answer comes with this multi-pronged approach where we come together as a community and we tackle this problem head on. Now, while I said at the beginning it's a great turnout here, it's not everyone in Peters Township, so I have a little homework for you. As Dr. Traynor said, we're in school, so you have some homework tonight. I encourage you, each and every one of you, to tell your friends and family about what happened here tonight. Explain to them the things that are going on. Because again, not everyone's here, but we can spread that word. Because that is the best way to get the message out there, is when we have those boots to the ground and people in the community are empowered to spread that word. So I want to thank you all for coming out here today. God bless.
We have a representative from the County Commissioner's office here, Mr. Harlan Shober, and he wants to speak to you for a few moments.
Good evening, everyone. There's been a lot of information shared this evening about the treatment, legal issues, and the importance of prevention as we work through the challenge of this drug epidemic. Some of you, the younger generation, a lot younger than me, may not remember the question we would use sometimes in the statement we'd make when we were confronting a big problem. We'd say, how do you eat an elephant? And the answer would come back one bite at a time. Well, we have a big elephant in the room tonight. We have a big elephant in the nation and along with Washington County. And you can see there's supposed to be an elephant behind all these bites up here. I needed a bigger elephant because when I start putting together all the different things that we need to do as a community and all the organizations, I start running out of room pretty quick. But this is an important thing that we have. And one of the things I'll say is if you started before the elephant, before the epidemic comes, there's things we're missing. Things like, I'll point out, something called IV. Now, some of you may say IV, that's intravenous. That's what we get in the hospital. Yes, those are the life-saving liquids that you need sometimes. I look at it as another IV. called individual value. Part of the drug problem, I think, is that we don't think enough of each other and ourselves. There's no respect out there. And I think this starts way beyond, and we need to get that back. As we look at that, we have our faith, our churches. We have all different people out there that are trying to prevent, as we said. And it's hard being the last one in line. I'm glad I'm just wrapping up, because each one of these people brought something very important this evening. But there are so many things out here. Yes, police, law enforcement. As it was said, you'll never do law enforcement to eradicate this problem. We've got to attack this thing from all sides, which I tried to demonstrate, this elephant being eaten up. We can't do it alone. We need everybody involved in it. Someone came to me, a parent, the other day, crying with her tears in her eyes. And she said, "My son's in jail. He had a drug issue. He went out and he caused a problem." She said, "But I tried to get help before he got in trouble." You know, and that struck me. So we have all kinds of programs. We need to do a better job in getting that out. Letting people know when I see a child that's changing their symptoms, seeing some of the things they're stated, that we can say, look, there's somebody I can go to. We need to advertise that. We're going to push that. A lot of these programs, pre-trial, we're doing this at the county. We just instituted this, where instead of just thrown in jail for something that's not very violent because of the drugs, you get assessed and you go into treatment instead of just sitting in jail waiting for something to happen. But that's only going to treat some part of the population. We have a reentry program. You go through incarceration. We're trying to rehab to get you back into society. But you can understand this is all going to have to work together. No one has one plan to say how we're going to beat this epidemic. You know, I look at drugs and I say, why can't we have drugs that don't make you high? Then no one would break into your house to get the drugs. Why? Because they wouldn't get high. So you can just see, I'm just showing you how all the people tonight have brought different areas together. And we need to, as a community right here, as your county commissioner, my job, along with my two counterparts, is to provide support for all of these areas. And we have initiated a number of programs to help fight this problem. One of the best ways to keep focused on this effort is to remember that any one of us in this room could be impacted in some way with this epidemic. We must all work together and do our small part to help us move forward to a brighter future. I thank you, on behalf of Judy and the others, coming out tonight to see this turn out. But we need to take this farther. We need to figure out how each one of us can leave here and do something more about the problem.
We've got quite a few questions, so I'm going to start asking them right away so that you can get home this evening. Holly, this first question is addressed to you. The writer says, I understand the People Network ready to support, but how does it work? Are they identifying students at risk? What is the process if someone is identified?
I'm assuming that's for student assistance.
Pardon?
Yes? Yes?
It was for you, Holly, yeah.
Once a student is identified, the team reviews. Mike, the team is going to review the necessary steps and will connect with one of Cheryl's staff to be able to conduct a drug and alcohol screening that is confidential. And the recommendation is then made for, if it's an in-school support mechanism, that's always the first alternative. If there is our in-school supports as well as outside connectivity that needs to be made with either a community-based service or a treatment provider, again, her staff will make that linkage. And parents are always provided and mandated to have written informed consent with that process. So at no time does the parent or guardian not have the information necessary to follow through with whatever those recommendations are. Part of student assistance as a mandate is that parents and or guardian have to be involved in that process.
Thank you. The next question is, why don't abusers want Narcan? Do we have adequate facilities like Gateway to meet the needs of abuse in our community? I don't know who should answer that.
Dr. Traynor.
Well, the reason some people might not like Narcan is it could induce withdrawal syndrome if they're addicted to it. And that's very uncomfortable, nausea, vomiting, joint pains, abdominal pains, sweatiness. So it's never our goal. Remember my slide said the goal is to improve breathing. It's never our goal to put somebody in withdrawal. So they certainly wouldn't like that. And I don't think they like their hide being ruined as well, but you can physically get ill when you withdraw.
And I can take the question on, do we have adequate providers to treat these individuals? Along with Gateway Rehab, our agency contracts with over 40 providers ranging from detox all the way to outpatient. So we have facilities throughout the state of Pennsylvania that we do contract with and that are available. And we have facilities, if you have private insurance, there are facilities even out of state that your insurance may cover. So is there a shortage of detox beds? Maybe. The issue is becoming that the detox bed may not be available at that very moment when we need it. Sometimes we're waiting 24 hours or longer for an actual detox bed. So that is problematic right now.
Thank you. I know we have some school district personnel here who might want to address this. Just stand and let us know if you're still here. Do the schools in the district have Narcan in their nurse's office?
Knowledge, do you know? I mean, we haven't trained.
And we're in the process of training more individuals in addition to our nurses. And the board is also working on our Narcan policies right now. We want to come to a policy committee meeting, so a lot of fun, and we'll see next month now we're going to go through the just 21st century or first read will be adopted.
This, I think, is an interesting question for parents to know the answer to. If you find someone already not breathing, should you still give Narcan or just begin CPR?
The important thing is that if they have no pulse is to do CPR.
CPR.
Narcan won't start the heart up.
Okay.
So it would be important to start CPR and call for help. Your police or fire service, your EMS certainly. The EMS people here have been using Narcan for 40 years. They're quite expert in the use of it. But not breathing means checking a pulse, no pulse, start CPR.
Thank you. Does that make sense to everyone? Good. Okay. This is one about OxyContin. It says, is it true that OxyContin is usually used with another drug?
Talking about in terms of abuse, the answer is likely yes. If you're talking for a prescription for somebody with chronic pain, the answer is probably yes also.
As a follow-up to that, the slide I showed, benzodiazepines with the OxyContin is a particularly dangerous combination. And we have seen that if you look at coroner Worco's data, you'll see that we've had a number of deaths due to that in Washington County.
Thank you.
The new CDC guidelines, they also urge caution when prescribing the opiate analgesics and the benzodiazepines as well.
Yeah. Do you think parents and students here this evening understand about OxyContin when you said they could eat it?
When I talk to people who are abusing those drugs, they don't say, I took a pill. They say, I ate 6 of them. So it's obviously not a medication to them. It's akin to a food substance or something. So it's an odd way of looking at things. When you take your amoxicillin at home, you don't say 8 amoxicillin 3 times a day for a week. These people see it that way. So it's not a medication. It's become something different.
How do you feel about safe shoot-up houses? I also read recently that one of the local townships was having a methadone clinic, and I'm assuming that's a place for addicts to go when they're when the regular services are not meeting their needs. So, what do you feel about that?
I guess I'll take that one. There is abstinence-based treatment, and there is also medicated assisted treatment. So methadone, Suboxone, buprenorphine, and Vivitrol, which I'm not going to get into all of those if the doc would like to explain those a little better, but they are all means to complement, if you would, cognitive behavioral therapy. So a methadone is just another mechanism by which some people are able to maintain sobriety. So I don't know if that answered, and there was a beginning part of that. What was, oh, the state of New York is actually, I read that they implemented these safe houses where people actually go, and it's a safe place to shoot up and use heroin, and basically because they're trying to limit Hep C, HIV, it's all those communicable diseases, and so that, I don't know that that's something that we're looking at bringing to Washington County at this point.
Thank you. I know we have a representative of an independent pharmacy here this evening from Jerry's down here at the front, and this question is, are the pharmaceuticals participating in solutions for these issues? I'm assuming that's what it means, but I think that's what the question is. I guess this next question probably addresses that issue. It says, if someone is injured and needs pain management, what other options are there other than the opiates? So you're saying that there are drugs now that are longer acting rather than...
Standard treatment in the old days, only used was too long acting, 9 to 12 hours, and short acting until in the knees. The short acting was high 6 and 8 times a day, which is ridiculous. So avoid use, we want to tackle the short acting down. The standard treatment is going to be too long acting, and maximum of the short acting, only one is going to be prescribed treatment therapy. So we're hoping to get that point. But yeah, we still need treatment to get people in hospice that need med. And there's no reason not to treat medicine. It's still a good thing to do. It's just we have to get it has to come back. We went from one extreme to other extremes. So we have to meet in the middle.
I think that there's a difference between acute pain. Your grandmother breaks her hip, nobody's saying that she shouldn't have pain medicine. But there needs to be a change in how we go from acute pain to chronic pain. It'll be different. Nobody's saying that we need to limit opiate pain medicine to people with cancer, for end-of-life care, for palliative care. The problem is not on that end. The problem is after somebody sees and writes that first prescription, what do you do then if you still have pain? What's a reasonable expectation if you sprain your ankle? You come to the emergency department, is the answer you leave with no pain or you leave with a tolerable amount of pain? So the things that work are sometimes a cold compress, an ACE wrap, some ibuprofen or Tylenol, and that's not enough. For a very short time, some opiates may be beneficial. But after that first week, then something has to change. You can't, here's another 20 Percocet. That's not the right answer. Is physical therapy a choice? Are there other modalities? The FDA and the CDC are calling for more research on those other non-pharmacologic things that can benefit. And I think it's, if you and your doctor discuss what's reasonable, what we can expect, then we could do the right things. At hospitals and doctors' offices now, there's patient satisfaction things. And so if you don't write that prescription for that drug-abusing person, then you're going to be taking a hit in terms of your satisfaction. So there are lots of forces at play that can affect things. In emergency medicine, according to recent studies, we write typically 20 or fewer tablets. And in lots of states, they're asking for just 2 or 3 days of medicine. Can you get into your doctor in 2 or 3 days? Poorer people less likely to have that kind of thing. So there's a lot of areas that need to be investigated, and a lot of things need to change so that patients' pain can be managed well. But there is definitely a difference between the acute management of an acute injury and something that's going to last longer. So there's a gulf there. And we need to research and find the best practices that work, but I don't think we're there yet. But as you said, let's avoid going to the other extreme. Some statistics from that one article I told you where it takes 7,600 people to get an opiate to make one heroin addict. If you reduce 10% opiate use in the emergency department, then that means 2.5 million people won't get an opioid each year in the U.S. And that means that you'd have to avoid treating 318 people with an opioid to save one person from becoming a heroin addict. And if you go to 75% ED reduction, now you're saying almost 19 million people, you can't have your pain managed. And that'll mean 2,291 people will be needed to prevent one heroin addict. So there needs to be something done, and people are starting to work together on it. So I'm encouraged by that. As I said, I can't, but we can. I think that's what it's going to take.
Thank you. Yeah, and thank you, Jerry, too, for coming this evening. I have a question here for the district attorney. Why aren't we prosecuting drug trafficking criminals with more severe punishment?
Actually, we are. One of the things that I didn't get a chance to get to, this was originally written for a much longer presentation. I thought I could get it trimmed down enough. It didn't work. We have a federal prosecutor now embedded in the Washington County DA's office. Most of the mandatories that were in place in Pennsylvania have been removed. What we're using now is federal mandatories, and we're working very closely with the U.S. Attorney out of Pittsburgh, David Hickton. There's a 20-year mandatory that we don't have in Pennsylvania. I've talked to Senator Barlotta about possibly considering getting this into legislation. What that mandatory allows us to do is if you provide heroin to somebody and they overdose and they're revived with Narcan, if we can find the person that gave them the drug, we can take them federally and invoke a 20-year mandatory. We've already done that with 3 people this year. You're going to see more of that. Actually, Mr. Hickton's been kind enough to provide a lot of support to Washington County, and we're kind of the model for this. We have a fusion center that's based in Cranberry. We had a training session about a month ago where we were working with the various police departments. We want them to get phones. We want them to treat overdose events as crime scenes and to get the information, interview people, try to determine where this is coming from. We're going to keep working with that model, and we've had initially it looks very promising. The the 20-year mandatory is a good incentive. It's amazing how many people you can get to start talking about where drugs come from. It's been particularly helpful with the fentanyl laced heroin that we saw in February that came out. We were able to get the individual, at least one of the individuals responsible for that quickly. So it's something we're going to continue to work on, continue to do as we evolve and move forward on this.
Thank you. And then this question is, why do doctors prescribe benzoids? I think that's how you pronounce it. I'm not quite sure from the spelling. To heroin addicts. Is this trading one addiction for another? There has to be a better treatment someday.
Well, I don't think the reason for using benzodiazepines or other medications are to mitigate the symptoms of withdrawal. It's not saying you're a heroin addict, here's 20 Valium, good luck to you. You know, it's in the context of a treatment program that you would help them be successful detoxing by treating symptoms. It's not willingly done or knowingly done.
Okay. Yeah. Officer Grimes, this is specifically for you. You said something as simple as a spoon can be paraphernalia, but maybe I had pudding with my lunch and ate it in my car. My question is, how can you tell the difference between paraphernalia and something that was used innocently?
In the case of something as simple as a spoon, it would be during an investigation where we also encountered the heroin. If you see heroin, those packets, some of those packets I showed you, and then if you look closely in that photograph with the syringes, beside those syringes were a spoon. That spoon is used as part of the paraphernalia to draw up the liquid drug into the syringe, to heat it up and draw it up. So it can't be just as simple as your spoon you ate pudding with at lunch.
Could I add on to what Mr. Grimes said? When it comes to that, one thing's for pudding. One of the tall tale signs is that they'll use that spoon, mix the heroin with water, and heat it up. Usually the spoons are blacked out, bent, things of that nature. Other pieces of paraphernalia you're going to see, they call them, Mr. Grimes could contribute to this, they're works. They're cotton balls to filter it through as they put it through the syringe. They're rubber bands to tie off for veins, things of that nature. But when it comes to a spoon, there's a difference between delicious tapioca being on it and the spoon being blacked out because there's a flame underneath it, heating it up for heroin.
I guess I'm going to make this the last question because I know you guys want to get home this evening. But the question is about DUIs. Are you able to recognize the difference, or is there a difference between alcohol and a drug that is being used in a vehicle?
One of the things that you are beginning to see more and more of in law enforcement are drug recognition experts, and that's specific training for the frontline officers who are encountering these traffic stops. The intent there is to train them and teach them to look beyond just the simple traffic violation and try to be able to determine exactly what are we looking at. And there are signs, but there's some people who are very good at it in Pennsylvania, and that field and that expertise continues to grow. BA, if you want to add to that. Or?
I think the same questioner wanted to know, does alcohol lead to the use of heroin, always lead to that? Yeah.
I wouldn't say, not necessarily. It comes down to, and this is something that we always talk with youth about, is that everyone starts typically at one scene. I call it the party scene. And it starts with alcohol and marijuana, right? Some people get out of that phase and they're okay. Others aren't. And one of the big misconceptions, I know the discussion was alcohol, but it was marijuana with young people. They see that it's legal in other states. Don't think it's an issue. But indeed, it is a gateway drug. Everyone always starts in that position. As I was up there talking to you, I've met many people in recovery, and they never tell me the drug they're there for is for heroin, it's for cocaine, or what they started out using, I'm sorry, was heroin, cocaine, meth. Every time, the drugs they said they started using, alcohol and marijuana. I know I've met enough people to tell me that that doesn't lie right there. So it can and it can't. It all depends. It really does.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Yeah, I think I'm going to throw that back again to the doctor. I think that's something that a lot of parents who have had kids hurt in sports activities of any kind have had that experience and are very concerned about the number of pills they're given by the pharmacist, or maybe the pharmacist that's here tonight can tell us how he would address that if he got somebody coming in with an injury needing a certain amount of painkillers.
It's our job at the same extent and telling you that your body is drive and drink with it. And the doctor actually for 240 as 360 of them, then we're going to question the whole scene. But we probably need to kill. So we can bring for a prescription of 20, and that's something that is more logical. It's a 10-day amount. You need time to get through the extreme pain. And at that point in time, you need surgery, you need drugs, you need other activities. Generally, children don't get long-term, or children young athletes don't get long-term use. It's what we see is the older athletes who, they've got performing at a high level. And the other.
My experience was that a person that I love very much, I always go to the doctor, to get long term, she was being a mother at a young age. And the doctor had given her prescriptions and she got addicted. When they cut her off, she went out in the streets and she's dead now. Because she just needs this addiction. She has nothing very older at every time. But this is a very addictive drug. It never really screamed, you see, that he was giving her too many prescriptions.
Kind of wrong for the reason that she should be referred to a pain clinic or to another addiction clinic or to, we shouldn't just handle the circumstances. We never leave our people. We never see our people.
And Jerry, Dr. Traynor mentioned this a little bit earlier, the PMDP, the Prescription Monitoring Database. It's a huge hole in our system. It was passed a couple years ago so we can monitor where drugs are being distributed. Because a lot of people are going to different physicians, they'd hit different ERs, and there was no way somebody like Jerry would know who's getting what. And Pennsylvania was like one of the last places to really pass legislation for an effective prescription monitoring database program. Unfortunately, 2 years ago, they didn't fund it. The new budget that just got passed supposedly has money available in it to fund this. Hopefully they'll cut down on it because these guys will know, if somebody's abusing the system. Right.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry if I have to cut you off because this was not supposed to be a question that I was going to ask. So I'm sorry. If you want to spend time with Jerry before you leave, then please do. Thank you very much. Thank you so